Greetings everyone, Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today we're going to take a look at the studio discography of a much beloved progressive rock band who has been asked for many times here on the channel. We're going to look at the ranking the albums, going to look at my ranking of the albums of Graaf Generator. Okay, so a band that's been around since 1969. Still, I guess you could say they're still kind of going strong, although they haven't released a new album in a couple of years. Time will tell whether we're going to see another one from them, but, had a lot of stops and starts throughout their career. Pretty prolific for the most part throughout the 70s, okay, at least the early part of the 70s. Then basically broke up in 77, didn't see them again until almost 30 years later. Reformation of the classic lineup, which of course includes Peter Hammill on vocals, guitar, and piano. Okay, Hugh Banton on Hammond organ, Farfisa organ, mellotron, synths, bass and bass pedals. David Jackson on sax and flute, and Guy Evans on drums. That's the classic lineup of the band, who recorded probably their seminal albums, but there have been some lineup changes, okay, here and there over the years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank them as I like them, my least favorite to my favorite. I will say that I dig most of these albums pretty much, okay, especially the top half, and there's not much separating those. My ranking could probably change every day on the top like 4 or 5 because they're that strong. But, and there's a couple towards the bottom that I'm not as into, but they still have their moments. So feel free to rank them as you like them, okay? Give us your top 5, your top 10, rank the whole catalog, whatever. No right or wrong answer here. We all hear these albums differently. So let's get started. So I'm going to start at number, or whatever the number is, at the bottom, is Alt from 2012. So this was mostly an instrumental album, and this features the trio of Hammill, Banton, and Evans. Okay, Mr. Jackson had since kind of bowed out of the group by this time, a few years before. I'm not as into this album as I am the other ones, and this is clearly my least favorite. Again, normally I like this sort of thing. I dig instrumental albums, and as long as they kind of go somewhere. For me, too many tracks on here, a lot of sort of aimless drones and jamming. All right. It doesn't quite work for me. Again, there are some decent pieces along the way, but as a whole, I listen to this and I'm kind of feeling a little flat. Like I expected a little bit more from Vandergraaf because, they've done like kind of group improvisations and free jazz and things before, but, maybe I'm just kind of missing that squonking, squealing sax from Mr. Jackson on here. I don't know, but it just doesn't work for me like most of their other albums do. Next up, 2005, their big reunion present 2-disc set. One disc of mostly song-based material, the other of a lot of kind of free jazz exploration and jams and things. This is good. This is strong. There's some Nutter Alert, okay, Every Bloody Emperor, of some of the stronger of the studio tracks. I just think here a lot of material. Some of it kind of throwaway, but as a return from this band after so long, gotta love it, gotta give it lots of kudos, right? It's good to have these 4 guys back again, even if maybe this would have been better off as a single album, take all the best of it and kind of squash it a little bit, but still pretty damn good. All right, 1969, the debut, Aerosol Gray Machine. Not quite the Vandergraaf that we came to know and love on subsequent albums that would start basically with their next one. It's very kind of psychedelic, all right, kind of acoustic in nature. Some of the seeds of what we would know to, love about Graaf Vandergraaf kind of starting to be planted on here, but not fully realized yet. Afterwards, it's a pretty strong tune. Orenthian Street, parts 1 and 2, that's pretty good. The back end of the CD, you got Necromancer and Octopus. Octopus is great. I think Octopus is basically the blueprint for the next album. Okay. Not a lot of the angry Hammill vocals on here, although, a little bit of that. I just, this album to me always lacked a little bit of a punch, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are going to rank this much higher, and that's totally cool. To me, I think it's just not quite there yet. Okay. But some good stuff on here for sure. All right. Next up, going to go to 2011, A Grounding in Numbers. Pretty strong album. All right, even though we're down to the the trio here, okay, one of the later releases, but I think a very strong album, highly strung as a kick-ass song. That kind of takes me back to like vintage 1974-75 Vandergraaf. What else? Red Baron is cool. Medusa, very strong track. Mr. Sands, Your time starts now. Mathematics. A lot of songs though. This probably album suffers a little bit from too much. All right. I know a lot of bands like to do that in the CD era. It's like let's put out 65, 70, 75 minutes worth of music, and it's like, oh man, stick it 45, 50, more than enough, right? Which is what they did on Trisector, which came out the year before, the time before, to 2008. This for me is Vandergraaf's kind of like hard rock album. All right, the guitars are cranked way up against the trio here, and I'm digging this album quite a bit. It's got a good guitar presence from Peter Hamel. Still got the organ from Mr. Banton, but I just think this is an angry rockin', okay, up tempo, a lot of fun album from Vandergraaf. A different album for sure, and only 9 tracks. Okay, you got Drop Dead is killer. Over the Hill is great. The Hurly Burly, Interference Patterns, fun album. I like that. All right, next up, we're going to go to 77 for the Quiet Zone / the Pleasure Dome. All right, by this point in time, you've got, Hugh Banton, David Jackson flying the coop. Instead of replacing them with, another keyboard player and another drummer, they bring in a folk violinist. What was his name? Graham Smith? Hold on. I forget the guy's name. He only appeared on this one album. Let's see. I'll tell you that in a second here. Graham Smith, that's the guy. So he comes in on violin. They also bring back Nick Potter on bass guitar. Nick was in the original incarnation of the band. Okay, so no more organ on this. I know that there's a little bit of sax on the album from David Jackson that he recorded before he left. But for the most part, this is a very different sounding album. Again, it's 1977, so things are changing. It's almost kind of like a Roxy Music flair to this album. I will say, I've always thought that I don't really like the violin in Vandergraaf's music, which is the reason why this album never really took to me as much as it probably could have. And I know a lot of people dig this album quite a bit, and that's cool. I don't dislike it. But it's just, I don't know. Chemical World is fun. The whole Cat's Eye, Yellow Fever running little medley thing is good. Sphinx of the Face is good. I don't know. For me, the violin is kind of majestic and mystical sounding. And it just doesn't, to me, just doesn't seem to fit in Vandergraaf's music, which needs that crazy squealing, squonking sax and the rampaging organ, right? So I don't know. This album is a little strange for me. Oh, I always thought so. But again, the songs are good. A band in kind of transition, and as history showed, they'd be no more shortly after it didn't work, right? Next up, I'm going to go with their most recent album from 2016, Do Not Disturb. This is pretty kick-ass. Like I said, I think when I reviewed this album initially, if they choose to kind of, there's kind of like hints in the lyrics and things that this might be the last. If they go out with this, they went out with a bang. This is quite good. Alpha Berlina, Forever Falling, Brought to Book, Almost the Words, Aloft, Oh No, I Must Have Said Yes. Good stuff on here. A lot of the early Vandergraaf kind of characteristics that we know and love. Hamel sounds great on here. He's got a lot of that snarl here. You got plenty of keyboards, right? Little bits of guitar. It's got its anger. It's proggy. It's, dig it. Dug it when it came out. Still dig it today. All right. Now we're getting to the absolute cream of the crop here, folks. The absolute cream of the crop. Very hard to kind of put these in a ranking, but did the best I could. All right, I'm going to go with a world record from 76 next. So, of course, there's a trio of albums that came out after the band broke up for a few years, got back in 75. These 3 albums, for me, are very closely linked together. They all have similar feels. I kind of call these the angry years. There's a lot of, like, angst in the lyrics and the vocal style of Hamel, and at times the music also was pretty angry. At times it's very atmospheric and introspective. This album is probably my least favorite of the 3, but it's got some really terrific stuff on here. For nothing, if nothing else, Muir Glass 3, the Songwriters Guild, is a terrific song and probably a top 5 Graaf Generator song for me. It is just, it's an epic, and it's got these great complex parts. All right. And gritty guitar work from Hamill, the snarling on the vocals. Love the Hammond organ work on here. But also you got When She Comes, A Place to Survive is very cool, Masks, and Wondering. So only 5 tracks, good amount of heft and length on these. A very strong album that, any other given day. And man, just because Muir Glass 3, I almost ranked it higher. Almost ranked it higher than this. Okay, Still Life, which came out in 1976 also. Great album. Probably not as an angry and aggressive an album as the one came before it. Okay. But still quite good. Pilgrims. Great song, great melodies on there. I think for me, Hamill's vocals on this album there's like a kind of yearning, like a tortured sense to his vocals on this album, which I think he did throughout his career. But specifically on this album, his vocals really kill me. And I think the music is not as powerful as from God Bluff, but I still think, excellent stuff on here. Very atmospheric and moody. The title track is great. La Rosa is an awesome song. My Room, Waiting for Wonderland, of course, the closer, Childlike Faith and Childhood's End, is a very cool, classic-sounding prog track from the mid-'70s. Can't go wrong with this album. Just cannot go wrong at all. All right, next up, I'm going to go back to 1970. The Least We Can Do Is Wave to Each Other. This, for me, is kind of really where it all started. It's amazing how in the span of, not even a year, it was maybe 5-6 months, something like that they went from the Aerosol Grey Machine to this. This is a killer album. All right, classic tracks on here. You got Darkness, 1111. Brooding, menacing, intimidating, dark. There's nothing like it. There's no other band in progressive rock that sounds like these guys. In fact, I wanted to bring it up earlier, but so many, especially these early albums, if you were to take out the organ and bring in big, crunchy, fuzz guitar riffs, many of these songs would be like proto-metal classics. I mean, that's like the style of a lot of these songs. They had their really mellow, kind of melancholy tracks, and then they had their real aggressive songs. And if, like I said, if you put really big, heavy guitar riffs in those songs, instead of like the sax and the Hammond, okay, you've got proto-metal classics right there. So other stuff on here. Refugees is great. Refugees is a gorgeous song. But again, the pain vocals from Hamill really kind of playing out very, very well. It's a gorgeous song, but it's just like emotional, like draining. White Hammer is killer. Whatever Would Robert Have Sold? Great kind of free jazz meets psychedelia meets prog rock. Awesome stuff. Out of My Book, and of course the killer After the Flood, which rounds out the album. Big fan, as you can see. All right, the top 3. Man, the order could change at any time on these, especially number 2 and 3. But I'm going to go with H to He, Who Am the Only One, or H to H-E. Okay, it's all chemistry stuff, right? Here you got a great collection of songs. Got Mr. Robert Fripp, who shows up on one of them on here. This is an album of complete epics. All right, just one epic after another. Released in 1970. All right. I do want to mention Paul Whitehead worked on the album cover art for some of these albums, right? So here you've got some absolute drop-dead classics. You've got Killer. All right, which is absolutely killer. You got House with No Door, The Emperor in His War Room, which is a 2-part track. All right, here you got some searing Robert Fripp guitar work on there, right? Making a guest appearance from King Crimson. You got the melancholy, dramatic Lost. All right, another 2-part track. And then you got Pioneers Over at nearly 13 minutes, which kind of finishes it all off. You know what? There are times where this actually might be my favorite Van de Graaf album. It's very close. Like I said, my top 3 there's not much separating them at all. And this was actually the 3rd album. Also came out in 1970. So they're pumping out a lot of albums here early in their career. All right. So, all right. Next up. Man, The Return. So, they, after Pawn Hearts broke up for a few years, Peter Hamill released a bunch of solo records. They got back together in 1975 with a classic lineup for my beloved God Bluff. which to me is probably one of the angriest yet most understated angry album ever released ever in the history of rock and roll. I mean, there is just some serious angst going on in not only the lyrics but in Peter Hamill's vocal performance on here. It's just dripping with just like venom, every song. And whether the arrangements are kind of like dreamy and atmospheric with all that organ, right, and the lilting guitar chords and what have you, and the sax or the flute, like, an Undercover Man or Scorched Earth. It's just like there's this hint of menace that just kind of comes out every time Hamill opens his mouth, and never more so than like Arrow, which is just a crazy, atmospheric prog rock meets free jazz. It's maniacal. He's just screaming up a storm, and it just like sends chills up and down my spine. I always love that song. And it just kind of builds and builds and builds. I think every song on this album just really kind of starts off a certain way and just keeps building in intensity. Then you got the Sleepwalkers to finish it all off. Only 4 tracks. That's all it needs. This is a perfect example of a fairly shortish album. Each track is somewhat lengthy, but you know what? They didn't need more than 40 minutes to just kind of come in and just absolutely slay you. That's it. Kind of say the same thing about my favorite, which is 1971's Pawn Hearts. All right, another great Paul Whitehead cover. I mean, this is all about epic, dramatic, terrifying musical storytelling, right? Lemmings, including Gog. God, great stuff. Man-Erg. How great is Man-Erg, right? And then, of course, you got the epic A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, man. It's like multi-part epic. Another, you talk about some of those like early 70s prog epics, right? Okay. Genesis did them. Yes, Jim did them. ELP did them. I mean, they all did, right? All did them. Many people forget to mention these guys as well, who also did some great epics. Got Robert Fripp on here as well, throwing in some fantastic guitar solos. This is savage, terrifying, and beautiful all at the same time. Like I said, my top 3, pretty damn great. Although, like I said, half of this discography for me is absolute top shelf, unique, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I think that's the one thing about Graaf Generator that always made them stand apart from all of their contemporaries, is that there was nobody else like them. Nobody ever sounded like them. They didn't sound like anybody else. Completely unique, all right? And you have to give them a lot of credit for doing that. So it may not have been music to sell to the mainstream, because their music certainly is not. Right? You have to be in the mood to listen to these guys. This is not for everybody. But if you are adventurous, if you have adventurous ears, you want to listen to something a little bit different, off the beaten path, I highly recommend these guys. If you're coming to this show and you've never listened to Graaf Generator before, check out any of my top 4 or 5 picks. Great stuff, great stuff. So let's recap. So coming in at number 1, we're going to go with Pawn Hearts today. Number 2, we're going to go with God Bluff. Number 3, H to He or H to H-E, Who Am the Only One. Number 4, The Least We Can Do Is Wave to Each Other. Number 5, Still Life. Number 6, World Record. Number 7, Do Not Disturb. Number 8, The Quiet Zone, The Pleasure Dome. Number 9, Trisector. Number 10, A Grounding in Numbers. Number 11, Aerosol Grain Machine. Number 12, Present. And number 13, I'm going to go at the bottom with Alt. There you have it. Graaf Generator ranking the studio albums. Hope you dug it. Curious to see what you guys think, how you rank the catalog. Like I said, pick your 5 favorite, your 10 favorite. All right, rank the whole catalog. Rank them as you like them, right? Because we all hear these differently, and curious to see some discussion going below about favorite Graaf albums, favorite songs, all that kind of stuff. We may yet do a top 10 songs on these guys as well, so we'll see how it goes. All right, guys? So this is on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, of course. We're here on the mighty YouTube all the damn time. What do we got coming up next day or so? Going to rank the albums of Bebop Deluxe for all more prog stuff coming at you. Going to do a review of the new Crypt Trip CD. That's coming up too. All sorts of stuff on the agenda. Coming up this weekend, Jack Toledano's coming back for Iced Earth Top 10 Songs. And there's plenty more where that came from. All right, so we'll see you guys real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.